humans, and welcome to MRAH and Rosenbaum are humans. Marianne is busy, very, very busy with the Christmas season. I think she opened up some kind of bricks and mortar shop or something. So you are brought to today. We have a podcast with two non-Christmas celebrating hosts, I believe, which would be myself, Benjamin Rosenbaum, and Sophia Babai, who I asked to come pinch hit co-host today.
Hello. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. First question, what is this podcast about?
Excellent question. And I do wish we'd figured it out over the past however many episodes. But I will tell the origin story instead, in lieu of an actual. I mean, I could make speculations about the text. I mean, the author is dead, so I don't know what it's about. But as a critical reader, I could speculate about its intent.
Ben, you're the dead author.
I'm the dead author. That doesn't stop me from being the live critic.
Great.
Okay, so origin story of the podcast. Marianne and I were having books come out around the same time. We're like, our friendship goes back a long, long time to I first met Marianne when she came and dropped by my Clarion in 2001 to pitch Strange Horizons, then a new magazine, new crazy little idea she was putting together.
I was alive in 2001. I was really worried you were going to give a time when I wasn't alive yet, but
you were in existence. You were in this incarnation when I met Marianne.
I talked and everything.
You were like verbal. And then, so then we mostly hung out at WisCon, and it became a tradition for me to fly up to Chicago and like drive to WisCon with Marianne and a rotating cast of other friends like Jed Hartman and Alex Gurvich and whoever was in the car. And we would have a grand old time on the 2-hour drive between Chicago and Madison. And it sort of became a running in joke that we were like, this should be a podcast, because we were, I don't know, philosophizing and whatnot sometimes about the state of the field, because we're all science fiction writers and editors or something, and sometimes just in general. And then we had an idea to have a joint road trip to promote our books when The Unraveling was supposed to be coming out, and Marianne was publishing, I believe, Vegan Serendib or Taste of Serendib, one of her Sri Lankan cookbooks / memoirs.
And then you turned that road trip into a podcast.
Well, here's what happened. We had everything planned. We were like, we're going to hit, we're going to go all these authors' towns and houses, and we made plans with them, and we booked bookstores, and it was really cool. We're going to go different, show up in John Scalzi's town and do a reading with him, and show up in, Chris Barzak's town, and so on. And then this plan was to take place in spring of 2020.
That is often I have many stories that conclude with, and it was March of 2020. So
that's right, many such stories. So we turn it into a podcast instead, and thus it is history. And Marianne, because Marianne founds organizations like Other People Have Lunch, and starts projects and is an impossible fount of social energy and stuff, decided to glom the podcast onto, or put it in the context of, the Speculative Literature Foundation, which is an arts grant making and a million other things, whatever she comes up with, agency that employs Connor, our lovely producer, and various people, and doles out grants. You should check it out. Speclit.org, I think. Anyway, and so we put that. Yeah, so we put that into, we made the podcast inside of that, which gave it something of a remit of helping new writers, because part of speclit.org's ambitions in the field of making content is stuff that you are looking for, you want to learn how to write and you don't feel like shelling out for an MFA, maybe we could help. And so there are, there's a bunch of specific craft oriented content and courses and stuff. But in addition, the podcast is sort of us rambling about the field and other things and what you might want to know as a writer, and other things that have nothing to do with that whatsoever. There's also a lot of conversations about politics and parenting and all the things we talk about,
My primary, so this is so embarrassing. don't even know if I should say it. I'm going to say it anyway. My primary association with Marianne Mohanraj is that since this is a podcast, for folk who do not know, I am brown, and periodically I and other like brown women or women-looking folk who write sci-fi fantasy will just have conversations about the various people who we've been mistaken for. And Marianne Mohanraj comes. I have never been mistaken for Marianne Mohanraj, and now I'm like, I feel like after this podcast, I'm definitely going to be, and it's kind of your fault.
Interesting.
But
well, I mean, here's the question though: is the mistaking? I get that that white people can't tell brown people apart. I get that, but can they not tell ages apart? Do they mistake?
I've been mistaken for Sophia Samatar. Like, and granted, our names are both Sophia, but like,
that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
don't.
Yeah,
I really don't know what to tell you, man. And to be fair Sophia Samatar does have that slightly ethereal quality of like, you could be 20, you could be 70. I really don't know, but she doesn't actually look like she's my age. So
no, true.
I don't know,
but
man.
Maybe as a textual thing, just it's like the Sophias and thematic similarities. Some, I think.
Yeah, some thematic similarities. I don't think the people who are making that mistake are thinking into the thematic similarities.
They're not. Probably not.
No, I mean, the vast majority, I mean, partially this is just that I'm fairly young for the industry, but the vast majority of authors who I have been mistaken for are 20 to 30 years older than I am. I was also mistaken at one point for Shannon Chakraborty, which is very funny because she's white.
Wow. Yeah, but she's got a brown name, so maybe that's... Yeah. That kicks in there.
Man. I
don't have I ever been mistaken? I don't know. That's white privilege talking right there. I don't think I've been mistaken for anybody in science fiction.
I don't know who people would mistake you. I mean,
I mean, there's a bunch of like scruffy Jewish guys writing science fiction, you would think.
I mean, yes, I'm just thinking, there's that one actor who I think you look like, who is not a scruffy Jewish guy. He's a scruffy Greek guy, I want to say.
Oh, yeah. I get that a lot. Jason from The Good Place.
Yeah, he's Derek in The Good Place.
Derek in The Good Place. I think his real name is Jason, maybe.
Jason with an M? Something. Yeah.
I that is the latest thing I have gotten. That like nowadays, that's what I get is Derek from The Good Place, because I do have that energy. Like I was maybe just created on a whim and am very excited about it.
I was just rewatching The Good Place, and every time he shows up, I'm like, Ben!
It's Ben! In my many years ago, back in the 90s or something, I used to get Jeff Goldblum. I feel like we've diverged, but I Fly era Jeff Goldblum and I of that era had a certain similar vibe, I believe.
Well, I just watched the Wicked movie, and I did not go, oh, hey, that's Ben. So for what it's worth.
No, he's I haven't seen him in the Wicked movie, but but you know,
it's really
I'm thinking
quite good.
I've heard it's good. I'm thinking of like Ragnarok. I feel like I do not have quite the gay-coded villain pulp vibes of Jeff Goldblum in Ragnarok.
Yeah, I do feel like gay-coded.
He's also enviously.
Got gay-coded villain pulp vibes in Wicked. I mean, that film, I just reread the book, like literally was rereading. I finished it, I want to say 15 minutes ago.
Wow.
It's
cool.
Well, I watched the movie and then, well, I'm judging for an award right now when I haven't read a book for fun in about 4 months. Yeah, the Otherwise Award, which it's been super fun, but like it's great. I'm having a fascinating time, but I just was like, I watched the movie and I remember the book being very different, and I remember it being very kinky, and I remember most of it going over my head. And also I think Elphaba and Glinda had sex in it, and so I reread the book, and Elphaba and Glinda do not, it's completely ambiguous whether they have sex. They definitely on the page kiss.
Yeah.
And they definitely sleep in the same bed, and Glinda has a lot of feelings about that. Like, it's not, it is by no means a queer-coded book. It is just a queer book.
It's just queer.
Like, they're
it's
not
just straight up queer.
Very, like, far more so than I remembered. But it's not actually clear whether they have sex or whether Glinda really wishes that they'd had sex.
Sure, which is however, equally queer, honestly.
Yeah, no. And again, like, they do full-on kiss. Like, the Defying Gravity scene, in that they just kiss, which actually I think is a little less gay than Defying Gravity. But it was just kind of like, oh, this was published in the 90s. That's fun.
Sure. Yeah, Yeah, that's an interesting, like, the 90s is sort of a transitional period. I feel like there was a time when science fiction was kind of like this queer haven in a way, because, I mean, in addition to actually probably not being so great for some queer people who were in science fiction, I'm sure, but was kind of like it didn't count. Do you know what I mean? In much the same way that campy stuff, it's like there could be full-on gay sex scenes in science fiction in the 70s. People are like, it's the future.
It's the future. I mean,
it's
that's actually pretty accurate of the future. So
right. Well, it was pretty accurate of the future, but I think also they thought that a lot of things like that were like, it was sort of just like, yes, partly it could have been seen as a prediction, but also just like as a way of being like, it's a wacky world. We have slide walks and dirigibles and women kiss each other. Like, just like as
flying
a
cars and
marker.
homosexuals.
There was a period where one way you knew in the movie that you were in the future was they'd have a black or woman president. Like it was like dirigibles it was like Zeppelins for alternate fiction. You would see in the background a woman or a black president and be like, I see, this is set in the future.
Damn it, Ben, I'm sad now.
Well, we got 1 out of 2.
We got 1 out of 2.
Okay, sorry to bring the mood down.
Now I'm thinking about the Barbie movie, but I haven't actually watched the Barbie movie, so I have nothing
Barbie
further
movie
to
is
contribute
great.
to that.
I also have nothing to contribute that's not spoilery, except that the Billie Eilish Barbie movie song came up on my Spotify, and its infinite wisdom graced me with that track today, and I was like, this is a really good song. Anyway.
My musical taste is very varied, but what I have been listening to for the past week is Bollywood and Fleetwood Mac.
Nice. I feel like that goes well together.
It goes really well together. But
now I feel like there should be a Bollywood Fleetwood Mac jukebox musical. Like they just set the story of Fleetwood Mac as if it were taking place in Mumbai and go with it.
Honestly, that sounds delightful. I did watch a play recently that was blatantly based on Fleetwood Mac. Complete with, I think someone sued them because it was too close.
I mean, that's and they a marred badge of honor, presumably.
Yeah, but also it had music that was very Fleetwood Mac music, and both my friend who I was watching it with, I forgot how to make sentences, which is great because I'm on a podcast. She was saying it's not going to be as good as Fleetwood Mac, obviously, but I feel like they did a really good job of. Obviously, it wasn't as good as Fleetwood Mac, but it really felt like, I'm listening to Fleetwood Mac.
Right. It evoked.
Yeah, it evoked very effectively.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That is a thing that I think was a writing lesson that I learned. Ooh, segue to the relevant part of the podcast.
Segue to the writing. Oh gosh, look at us go.
There is something there about faking it, about like you don't, like the reader will give you, or the viewer will give you like a certain amount of slack because they want to be there. So you can evoke like, this is, one of my favorite examples of this is the end of The Dispossessed. Ursula K. Le Guin describes Shevek having a breakthrough in physics, which is kind of like, is to Einstein what Einstein was to Newton. It's like a vast breakthrough in like physics. And the wonderful thing about it is that she obviously cannot actually tell us because then she'd have to be, many years in the future and a physicist. But like, she manages to make us feel like we are reading Shevek have a Einstein to Newton level like breakthrough and it's like it gets you there, and a lot of that is like what you leave out, I guess, which may not be true for when you're trying to do Fleetwood Mac-esque covers, but there may be similar tricks. I'm not a filmmaker, but like, there may be like ways that you gesture at things and the reader fills them in.
Well, I do think books you can get away with. So books and stage plays, especially lower budget stage plays. And I mean, this was on Broadway, so it had a bit more of a budget, but they were definitely trying to evoke it's all set in a studio.
Abstraction. Yeah.
Versus a movie or a TV show, there's, I think, a little more onus on you to actually show people things.
It's a little more literal.
It's where you run into the monster is never as scary as the monster that you're imagining thing, because you're imagining exactly what you think is the scariest, and all they have to do is play creepy music, and then they come up with something that isn't.
I mean, it's interesting that I feel like part of it is conventions. Like stage plays have these conventions where it's kind of
Yeah.
like you're bought in. You're, as the audience, you're going to fill in. And sometimes you could do that in visual media. I mean, one example is that the monsters in Doctor Who are like on purpose ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Like they are like tin cans with vocoders. They're and that is part of
They are
the
delightful tin cans with vocoders. Thank
yeah,
you very
and
much.
that's
But yes,
part
they
of
are.
like the what it, you because that's the convention. If you had a super realistic, like really high level CGI monster on Doctor Who, I think it'd be a little disappointing. I mean, I'm not sure they've
Yeah, it
never
would
done
be
that. Maybe
weird.
they've done it occasionally, but it's like, But there's something about the goofy rubber suits and tin cans that is like, this is the, you know what I mean? That's like it's a feature of that universe that you buy into, kind of, and it's kind of stage play esque, right? I mean, maybe it's I'm not enough of an Anglophile to make the argument that it's like related to pantomime, but I mean, it's got some roots somewhere there.
I don't know enough. I similarly don't know enough about pantomime, but I do think that there is a way in which just like camp lets you get away with a lot because you're immediately signaling like, yes, these are tin cans. You have to be scared of the tin cans. And often there's a bit of a buy-in that goes with like, sure, we'll be scared of the
Yes, if you make that leap to like that emotional leap that you're willing to be scared of the tin cans, then it kind of broadens the horizon. You're now a reader who is asking for a different thing than everything to be
Mhm.
literally,
Yeah.
than I don't know, a AAA budget CGI movie where where you're exacting about the exact, you know what I mean? It's like it's a different imaginative space. It's like a continuum between uh it's on a continuum towards reading, right? Where
Yeah.
you're willing to invent more yourself.
There's also a what? Wow, I keep starting to
All
say
right,
a thing and
well,
then forgetting the thing. No, The Interview with the Vampire
okay, go.
TV show. I found
Okay.
it.
Nice.
Um, something that again, this is actually the same friend with Stereophonic. I'm making her sound very skeptical. She's not. She's just very thoughtful.
She's like
Something.
a character now on this podcast. We've created this
Yes,
skeptical friend. Okay, go
yes.
ahead.
Her name is Juliet. She has her own podcast. It's called Dragons Made Me Do It. It's about Anne McCaffrey. I don't know, man. Um, but the point
I
is,
think there's a lot to
in
say
the
about Anne
book,
McCaffrey. Yeah.
there's a lot to say about Anne McCaffrey. I haven't actually read her books, but I hear a lot just from the friends making the podcast.
I think
In
it
the interview,
presages a lot of things. Anyway, yes, go ahead. I'm going to stop derailing you.
I
Interview
also
with a
have some
vampire.
thoughts about dragons. Interview with the Vampire book. Lestat de Leoncourt, the guy, the blonde one, with the My
I haven't
Immortal
seen
type
it, but I
opening.
know who Lestat is. Yeah.
So he is supposed to have this transcendently beautiful voice. And that's a really difficult thing to, because again, it's the same problem as the scariest monster in the world. Like what I think is a transcendently beautiful voice isn't going to be what you think is a transcendently beautiful voice. And the solution that they went with is just have him go like very campy 80s rock star style, which I thought was brilliant because you don't need to have a beautiful voice to be a campy 80s rock star. You just need to have glittering raw charisma, which the actor absolutely does. And it's the same way where if you were trying to actually make his voice sound beautiful, that would be much more challenging because he's supposed to sound supernaturally beautiful.
This sort of reminds me in a funny way of like, this is the opposite of that, is when you have a cast of very accomplished like singers, for instance, and you have to get them to sing worse because the arc demands, you know what I mean? There's going to be like
Yeah.
a montage scene where at the end of it they sing better. So before that they've got to sing worse, or same with anything like that, right? Like the dance or whatever. So it actually takes a lot of skill, I think, to be a really good singer convincingly singing badly, or
Oh,
not badly,
absolutely.
but like not so well, like convincingly singing like an untrained singer. you
Yeah.
know, that's
I feel
that's
like that's particularly hard with dancing because you still need to have the skill to do the steps correctly. Like a chorus line, they're all playing the chorus, but there's this one guy who's supposed to be better than the others. And I just think about what it's like to be the other people doing the because it's a fake
trying to
audition.
hold it in. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's like you're trying
exactly.
to hold it in, but you also have to do these very
Yeah,
complicated steps and not
yeah, and
follow.
you also, I mean, it's, yeah, exactly. You can't break the number as a number, but you also can't outshine the, yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of a related skill to like not drawing focus, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
times actors, like a lot of times that's a common failure mode of like talented young actors in amateur productions, is they can't turn
Yeah.
it off.
Yeah.
I have a good friend who was a really talented actor with a lot of presence, and in high school, he would I hope he doesn't mind my saying, he would sometimes ruin scenes he was in the background of. He was just like the inspector who had come and said something. He was standing at the back and some very dramatic thing was happening between two people in the front of the stage. He was way over in the back of stage left, but you couldn't look at anybody else. So wasn't doing anything, but he didn't know how to turn it off. So it just like, nobody else could. Nobody
There's
knew
also
what was happening in the
frequently,
A spot.
especially in Hollywood, just the like too attractive problem. And that was actually both an interview with a vampire and in a different book I read a while ago called Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan, which I love very much. There's this thing of like, this background character is too pretty. He must be important. And
Right,
surprise,
right.
in both cases, he's turned out to be super important because
It's a tell
yeah,
it's a tell where the armature of the industry is exposed, and you're seeing kind of like the different casting pools. Like he was like you can immediately tell that he was cast by the person casting lead actors and not the person casting character actors, and so it immediately breaks the illusion because you're not supposed to know he's a lead yet. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
but too
So
pretty.
wait, before we go on another tangent, I wanted to
Okay.
say for the I am very pleased that you have grasped the nature of this podcast, which is absolute rambling in all directions in an explosion into all possible conversational niches. But also, I feel like we should tell the audience what the hell you're doing on the podcast, because we explained to you what the podcast was,
No, it was
but we
like,
didn't
who's this
explain to
person?
them who you are.
Do I have to explain who I am? I think
I
you
don't
should
know.
explain who I am. I think that
Well,
would
I
be
could explain
funnier.
who you are from my perspective.
Sure.
I mean,
You go first, and then
there's plenty
I
I
want to
don't
hear the
know.
Ben Sophia intro, and then I can give the Sophia intro.
Okay,
I think it would
well,
be funnier
so
that way.
as I believe I said in the when we were chatting, when I dragged you onto the podcast over Discord, I think that one of like I like to on the podcast we like to give tips to young writers, and I think like us meeting and hanging out and very quickly becoming good friends is a classic con
Mhm.
interaction. We sometimes talk about like, should you go to cons? Is it worth going to cons? It might not be your thing. If you're an introverted writer, feel free to just sit in front of your keyboard. Do not let what I'm saying give you any FOMO if you cannot get to cons or you do not feel like going to cons. There are a million ways to do that. And of course, online spaces are also like just as many wonderful things spring up online. But if you're a rambling extrovert who is able to get to your local con and like eat cheap at the con suite.
Or if, like me, you're an introvert who's just really good at talking for hours at a time, as long as you get to go and not talk to anybody for a few days after that.
Yes, or even at the con. Like I've become much more introverted at cons lately in a way. Like it's weird because I'm such a like Energizer Bunny extrovert at cons
Hmm.
usually, like just talking till 3 a.m. And COVID, because there was all of this restrictions and masks and people tended to pod, it would be like, okay, these three people we're gonna like hang out in rooms and
Hmm.
unmask, so we're just gonna chill a lot with them. Like it forced me into a much more introverted mode, and I actually kind of liked it. It was kind of funny because I was like, this is not me at a con, but I was like, oh, I could just sit and get some writing done in a room with three other people and chat occasionally and like not bounce off the walls. Anyway, we met at ReaderCon, right?
Yes. Sorry. We met at a. Do they know what ReaderCon is? Should we tell them what
Perhaps
ReaderCon
we
is?
should tell them.
ReaderCon is a lovely little sci-fi fantasy. Well, not little. There's like 200 people.
It's
It's
little.
it's little.
I mean, there are
I found it
littler cons, but
I found
it's
it very large, having never gone to a con before. But after that, I went to AWP, which is like 10,000 people. So now I think
yeah,
ReaderCon
yeah,
is
yeah,
little.
yeah.
But it's a sci-fi fantasy con in the Boston area. It's very lovely. It's a little bit on the academic side, but still there's just this era of glittering excitement to it
Yeah,
that I don't necessarily find at other bigger, slightly more pretentious conventions.
yeah, and that is an interesting axis. And ReaderCon is definitely so it's definitely ReaderCon's an interesting intersection of worlds because so AWP that's like a professional event, right? That's like
Yeah.
a convention that people go to, you know, and there are many such things, and also big commercial cons. Like the other end, that's literary, right? And then there's
Mhm.
like, Comic Con or Dragon Con or something, which is like hundreds of thousands of fans, or Gen Con, like hundreds of
Oh,
thousands
I'm
of very
tired
like
just thinking about
selling,
Comic-Con.
yeah,
I
exhausting.
pass by the Jacob Javits Center in October. I live in New York for half the year, and I'm just like, my social battery has been drained by staring at this building. I'm gonna go over there. But they also always have cool costumes, so it's hard.
Yeah. Well, and that's like a vast thing. And those are commercial in different, well, or institutional in the case of AWP, and commercial in the case of Comic Con. So the the ReaderCon is definitely in the tradition of fanish cons. So it's a con that is, organized by fans, and which is not unique, but kind of distinctive about science fiction and fantasy, because a lot of genres don't necessarily have um, this weight that the fans were organized early in science fiction and fantasy. Already in the 30s, fans, as opposed to professionals, were like producing spaces which professionals were invited to as guests, which is
In the
kind of not.
30s?
Oh yeah, in the 30s. Like science fiction fandom goes back to what, the Futurians or something. Like Asimov and those guys were
Wow.
hanging out in that. Yeah, it's very old. And it's very funny because a lot of it presages like what we now think of as like internet culture. But they were like having flame wars in like mimeographed. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, they were
No, I
totally.
need to find these Depression era flame wars.
Yes, Depression era flame wars in like AWP. There was all these. They were like I mean, they were literally like in it. And there is a through line. Like there is a way in which it seeded internet culture in some ways, because I think a lot of the people, because in the 30s they were doing these mimeographed flame wars and starting these conventions and things. And then you can tell that a lot of the people who in the 60s made the bones of modern computing, like Unix and Usenet, were like part of that world, and they named all their things like demons and trolls. Like they were like all fantasy nerds, and that's why the undergirding of modern programming is all named after fantasy shit. And then like those things bled into early like Prodigy and AOL, and they were just sort of like in the air, and like eventually internet culture, like the things we love and hate today about internet culture, which now dominate the world, like hotel rooms in 1930s with people arguing about rocket ships
Wow.
and robot ladies, was some of the genesis of that. Anyway, so yeah, so it's very old fanish tradition, and there's something very cool about some of that excitement that you're talking about, where it's like people are there for fun.
Mhm.
Um, in a way that they aren't necessarily, even if they might be having a good time, at things that are fundamentally come out of like institutional, where it's somebody's day job to organize it.
Nobody
Um,
goes to AWP for fun. You can have fun at AWP, but you don't go to
right,
AWP for
right,
fun.
right. And there's something that's amazing about being a science fiction writer, going to a thing partly for professional reasons, but also like, but in a space where the people creating this are not doing it because for any material gain. This is the fun thing. They're not doing this
Yeah.
in order to get to something else. This is the finish line. This is where they get to have fun, and that's just
Yeah.
such a wonderful space. And I've always found, and it's funny how many, what a large proportion of my friends I've made at cons, because it's sort of optimal for friendship. And I realized this when my daughter was really little and she went to preschool, and we were kind of like, maybe she'll make friends at preschool because she doesn't have, we just moved to a new country and she didn't have friends. And I remember talking to her about it, and I realized this is like the worst place to make friends in a way. Well, it was a sucky preschool for one thing, but the other thing was that um, uh, in a way that, like, it was a sucky preschool in a way where I was bamboozled by its shiny middle class correctness, and we
Oh
later found a
no,
much
not
we later found a much
middle class
scruffier.
correctness.
Like, it was just the worst thing, because it looked like they were all very professional and they had the best, like, glossiest, and then we ended up moving her to a much scruffier, more down tempo preschool, which was much better. But anyway, the reason it's hard to I realized that the reason she had a hard time making friends at preschool was the same reason I would have a hard time often making friends at work, because the stakes were pretty high. You kind of had to put up with these people one way or another, so you didn't want to take a lot of social risk, because you have to see if you're not going to have to like be like, oh, can you have that report ready for the next 5 years that you're at this company? You don't want to like take a lot of social risk. You want to like optimize for like pleasant.
Part of me wants to meet the version of Ben who's not taking social risks, and part of me is like, I don't know, that sounds creepy.
I mean, I still take more social risks than many people,
Sure.
but I mean, but at work I would take them judiciously, like for often the social risks I'm taking are because I feel like something needs to happen because of I need something to get done, and but
Yeah.
as opposed to just purely for fun, which is not to say I mean I would have not that I do make friends at work, but it feels like it's about maybe 200 times slower, right?
Yeah, it's
Like
different.
200 to 2,000 times slower in terms of number of minutes expended, right? Um, and at
Well,
a
there's an
con,
intensity that happens at cons. Like there is definitely, because I ReaderCon was my first con, but I've spoken at a lot of retreats and run workshops at retreats, and there is often this feeling that time collapses. Like you can walk out of a week feeling like you're friends with people because you've spent so many hours together that week. And because there's a vulnerability that, like, you're hanging out at 3 a.m., having conversations. No one's being professional at 3 a.m.
yeah, and I think the thing is that the social upside is immense and the downside is limited. Like it's the opposite of work because in a sense it's like if you come out, if you just make a fool of yourself somehow and somebody makes a fool of themselves right back, then you have this, potentially this great bond. And if they look at you askance, you can just move on. Like there's not, you're like, what have you lost, right? I'm never going to see them again, or if you or pass them in the hallway, whatever. But it's like there's no thing you're going to need from them. So it's like
So do
it's very
you
like
not
high
wake up
upside,
in the
low
middle of
stakes.
the night remembering that time you were mean to someone in fifth grade?
No, I mean it's not that I don't. I do have. That's interesting the way you framed that because I have much more guilt than I do shame.
Okay.
Um, I am less likely to wake up thinking about how I look foolish. I am more likely to still be sore, like not sore in the sense of mad, but sore in the sense of wound, like twitchy about things I did that hurt other people. Like I do have guilt. Um, but I mean, yeah, but that's not quite the same thing as looking foolish.
Yeah,
You know
I
what I
get
mean?
that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think if I hurt somebody at a con, which has happened, I feel like I need to repair that. If I just make a fool of myself, I don't particularly. I just can move on, right? I mean, it's like whatever. Um, I mean, I suppose there's a line, I mean, sometimes there's a mixture, but anyway, that's my theory of the case. So we met and hung out, and then I think something that is also like much like and it was March 2020. There's an element of our friendship that I feel like is interesting because we were talking pretty early on about uh, religion, and particularly like medieval uh, folklore, right? I think you said you said something like if I had a you said something oh, if like if I had a newsletter, it would have. I think I was like, "Do you want to be on my newsletter?" Which is something I say to people I just met at cons, and you were like, "If I had a newsletter, it would have I don't know some
Oh, yes, I was talking about gay Islamic poets from
and gay Islamic
early
poets and or
medieval era.
Islamic
Yeah.
mysticism." And I was like, Islamic mysticism, and I was like, "Well, sign me up for the Islamic mysticism part." And then we were talking about that, and then like we were sort of innocently like, "Oh, isn't that great?" And then I just have this memory. I think we've mentioned this before, but like all of a sudden it became we were just talking about Islamic mysticism and Jewish rabbis and in the 11th century Morocco and how how like visiting the graves of holy people would be interpreted or whatever. That was all we were talking about, but it became very emotionally important to me because it happened to be October 2023.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, and then as a result of all that, we ended up and then having some like more uh explicit conversation. I mean, like it wasn't that we were tiptoeing around anything. It was just a solace to have this connection while the world was
Yeah.
going to hell and everybody was yelling at each other and just be
Yeah.
like, oh look, we can be act like humans. But
Well,
then
we
at
were
some point
also
we
capable of having good arguments, which is rare right now.
yes, yes, and then we had a wonderful argument about politics and stuff. Um, uh, which, yeah, I think you commented on. It's like it's nice to have an argument where you end up disagreeing and feeling closer.
Yeah.
Um, and then as a result of that, I ended up roping you into a panel at the next ReaderCon precipitously on Israel and Palestine. So you had to talk
That was with a few days advance notice
to a
too.
huge room, and it was
In a
packed. Oh my God, the biggest panel,
gigantic room. That I
gigantic
think I was
room.
the only Muslim in that entire room. I think I was
Really?
one of two. I was one of two Muslim speakers at the convention.
Yeah.
And I don't think we were literally the only two Muslims at the entire convention, but it was just a very like, okay, there's like three brown people in this room,
Yeah.
and I know all of them by name.
You were definitely taking one for the team.
Yeah.
The backstory of that, just to say, is that my dear friend Amal Elmatar was guest of honor, and they let the guest of honor put something in the program book, and she had said something about Palestine, and they had gotten all squirrely about it, and she was like, restrained the urge to just flounce and was like, what if we have a panel where I explain what I mean? and then she reached out to me and Karen Meisner to be her Jewish friends as backup. And I was like, what if we put another brown woman on the panel? Because then there was another Jewish guy on the panel, and I was like, this is a little unbalanced. Maybe we should have a Muslim on a panel about Israel Palestine.
Yeah.
Which it was very gracious of you to let me do that to you.
I also think you forgot that I was Iranian because I remember Karen saying, yeah, when we had the call up. Context again for the listeners. I am Iranian and Indian and Afghani and Tanzanian and like 4 other things. He cannot be faulted for not remembering each and every one of those.
Dropped off the list, yeah.
But when I was having a conversation with Karen Meisner, who's a wonderful, wonderful woman who I had at that point only spoken to a couple times, but she was running the panel. She did a great job. But she said, oh, and Ben and I were talking about the fact that, your country isn't actively being bombed right now. And I was like, my country was bombed 4 days ago. Where do you think I'm from exactly? Right. But we made it work. No, that was a really valuable and frightening experience for me, because after September 11th and after a mosque in my town, like I come from Bellevue, Washington. It's a very progressive area, but a mosque was full on burned down. We started getting all of these lessons of like, how do you convince people you're not a terrorist? How do you convince people this, that, the other? And so we never explicitly said, how do you convince people not to kill you? Right. But that was an underlying thing because there was a lot of violence happening. And one of the big ones that I got was like not just don't ever talk about Israel and Palestine. Don't say the word Palestine. Just saying the word Palestine, someone might kill you.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there in front of 300 people having this really intense physical reaction of like, it's very unlikely that someone is actually going to kill me. But that's what was happening to me physically. And I feel like that, and I didn't say that out loud. I don't actually remember. That whole thing was a fugue state. But I do think that really helps me to understand everything happening in this conversation and why it's so hard for people to have conversations about it, because everyone is to one degree or another, not everyone, but like most of the relevant parties are to one degree or another bringing the physiological feeling of like someone might kill me, like me specifically.
Well, actually, there's only 2 kinds of people in the conversation: the kinds of people who are having a terrified physiological reaction, and the kind of people for whom it's an abstraction.
Yeah.
And so they and
like, I have much more patience with the former group of people, even when I disagree with them.
Right. And exactly. And it's and I mean, I have some compassion for the people who have an abstraction, but I'm also super frustrated with them.
Yeah.
Because it's like, because I it's not that I don't understand that somebody is like, this is really important and you should feel the right way about it. And you're like, oh, obviously I picked this team. And then that's like, you know what I mean? But like, it's like, but there's a certain very destructive superficiality that comes from it being an abstract intellectual exercise, right?
Yeah.
And that's who dominates the conversation, because that's most of the people who have most of the power and influence are people who are like, you know, anyway, but
And also who have the lowest stakes and therefore
yeah,
can dominate the
yeah,
conversation.
exactly, and who are, yeah. So anyway, I thought we did a great job.
We each of us only cried once.
Yeah,
So
that
I'm
wasn't.
proud of us.
Crying more would have been fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
you and
one
I
of my
did.
goals
You and
was
I
only
did the
cry once.
crying. You
You
and I
did
did
the
the cry. Oh, one
crying.
of your goals was only
Yes.
cry once. Well, that's funny. You were probably like cry only once, and I was probably like cry at least once. Um, but yes, we did the crying, and that was very important. Honestly,
Yeah.
like that was like a important part of the panel, I think. But yeah, but I just feel like also there was this. Uh, People came up afterwards with such, who probably had vastly different opinions and
Yeah.
were all kind of moved, and yeah. So anyway, we did that, and yeah, and then I hired you to be a consultant on my
Yeah.
game that I'm writing.
We also ran a house con together that one
Oh, and
time.
we
Like
ran a
we
house
were
con together.
yeah. We've only
Yes,
known
and you
each other
play
for like a
tested
year
my
and a half.
game
And I play tested your game twice.
twice. In
Yeah.
fact, you're one of the few people who's play tested the game twice. I mean, my son has play tested it like 6 times, but
I also think you got the earliest. Yeah, I think you got the earliest version of my thinking about the story that I'm currently writing, which does mean the version you got is almost entirely not accurate at this point. But you were one of the first people I emailed about it.
and also you wrote a short story based on a game that we were in.
It's true.
It was like
The
I was there
Bluebeard
when you were
story.
like, this is how I could come up with a short story.
Well, it was gonna be a Bluebeard's Bride story. It wound up a vampire story. And then I read it
That
actually at one of
works.
your readings. The one of that reading thing at ReaderCon. So the point
Yeah.
to the
A group
audience
reading
is
that we did at ReaderCon.
sometimes at cons you will have one 4-hour conversation with a guy and he'll become a very close friend of yours.
And then you'll embark on many adventures. Anyway, so that's how you got on this podcast. How you got on this podcast is Marianne's really busy. And I was like, who do I want to talk to for 2 hours? Who's probably willing to jump on a Zoom call with me for 2 hours?
But yeah, yeah, I didn't actually even vaguely attempt to give an introduction. Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a writer and an editor and a writing coach and a somatic therapist. And I bake things. I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of
And a
things about me.
mystic.
It's hard to. And a mystic. Yes, I'm a Sufi mystic. Not to be confused with a witch, though I have nothing against witches, but a lot of people do get that confused. I think
Uh-huh.
witchcraft is cool, to be clear. It's not the same thing as mysticism.
I
Because
mean,
with
probably
witchcraft you get to do
except when
things
it
on
is.
purpose. Well, the thing with mysticism is there's an element of surrender. I don't get to decide what happens. I can have a request, but I'm very fundamentally surrendering to whatever power of the universe wants to move through me. Whereas with like witchcraft, you get to cast spells. You get to be like, here is the outcome
I
that
mean,
I want.
I think that's not what witchcraft is, but I feel like
Yeah.
witchcraft is also like a pretty broad term, and particularly the sort of neo-pagan reclaiming of it. There's probably people who are Wiccan mystics who use the word witch more like you're using the word mystic, and less like I'm going to achieve this goal of like, less like I'm brewing a love potion, and more like this is the way I talk to the universe.
I actually feel like a lot of the new age movement is more with the love potion-y type stuff. I don't know. I briefly spent some time in new age witchy spaces and they were fascinating and they were very different from like because I do know people who consider themselves witches whose families have been practicing witchcraft for thousands of years and like it looks very different. But also so much of the new age movement like there is sort of that sense of rootness not rootlessness exactly, but a sense of like our roots have either been torn from us or we have some kind of trauma around our roots and now we're creating it's in the name like we're creating a new thing.
Yeah, 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 sure.
um
Yeah.
So
And I think there's a
often I'm
huge
using the older terms.
yeah, and I mean, there's a huge range too of how, which is interesting. I mean, I'm not an expert on this either. I was in high school. I was in a coven.
I did not know this about you. I need to know all about
I
this
did.
coven now.
Well, this is actually really funny because I was doing a report for English class, I think,
Mhm.
about something, and I was like, this is very embarrassing. I'm like 16 or 17 at this point. And I feel like I was a callow youth, and I was
As
sort
many
of,
are.
I grew up on Free to Be You and Me. But I was kind of, and it pains me to say this, but it's probably a good, it's a good admission to make, to illuminate processes. But I think I was kind of a post-feminist. Do you know what I mean? Like I was kind of like indulgent, like sort of. This was 1987, by the way, and I was sort of arrogantly like, didn't they solve all that stuff? I mean, aren't we done? And there was no internet. Okay, anyway,
No,
so
I
and
get it.
I
I get it.
I was like, I'm gonna do a report, and I heard a rumor that there was a witch at our school, and I was like, I think you had to interview someone, and I was like, I'm going to interview the witch at our school because that sounds awesome. So I interviewed the witch
That
at our
does sound
school,
awesome.
and it was a great conversation in which I stopped being a post-feminist. I was like, oh shit, really? And
Ben, this is an amazing origin story for you.
right? And this witch in my school had a Dianic coven.
Okay.
So there couldn't be any men in it. And I was like, this is very exciting and I need to do something. Can I like found the men's auxiliary house? And she was like, sure, you can be the men's auxiliary house of the Dianic coven. So then I roped a bunch of other guys into being the men's auxiliary house of the Dianic coven. And then we went off and it was very Starhawk influence. Starhawk was
What
sort
was
of
your
like
pitch to them?
that wasn't that hard to sell.
They were all really excited about joining the men's auxiliary of the Dianic Coven.
It was witches. It was amazing. We were all fantasy geeks. We were like, we can
Sure.
actually go hang out with witches.
Great.
Um, and I don't know. There was certainly an overlap with queerness too. There was not a lot
Oh
of.
yeah.
It was clearly queer, and there was not a lot of queer activities to be had in 1987 in Virginia high school. So like, we were down. We were pretty game anyway.
Yeah, there are very few activities queerer than joining a coven, so
I know, right? So, anyway, so we, I'm realizing it's very Agatha all along. Anyway, so yeah, so that is the extent of my experience. Well, not entirely, but that's the main thing. But I will say that, so Starhawk, I don't know if you know, it was very big. It was sort of like a philosopher of neo-pagan witchery.
Oh yeah, that
She's like a
person. Yes. Okay.
California witchy California person. And I don't know, so I don't know very much about it, but I will say that I think there seemed to be, at least at the time and in later things, between eight, and this is true maybe to get a little bit off of the thin ice of my talking about people who I'm not able to represent. It's certainly analogous in some ways, I feel like, to my experience of Judaism, because it's like there's one thing if you're like, this is the absolute real thing that always was, and we've rediscovered the ancient thing, and that's what we're doing. That's one way you can
Yeah.
look at things. The other way you can look at things is like, there's this resources, and we are going to imaginatively recreate and reimagine ourselves into, in the present, today, now, us. We are going to imagine ourselves into a kind of imagined past and make something that is a creation we are making now, that is art and whatever religion by us now. But do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't.
That's
You
lovely.
can yeah, so I don't. So I think there are, in all of these phenomena, there are people who are like, "This is the true thing," and then there are people who are like, "I'm doing this because, because it's a way in, right? It's a way. It's an imagery. It's a way that I can, that gives me room to speak or imagine this or be here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I knew some people in like SCA offshoot. Human really religious creativity is so bountiful and wondrous. Do you know what
Yeah.
Discordianism is? Have you ever met any Discordians?
Oh, that sounds so describe it to me, I might.
Well, it's what I love about Discordianism is it started out as a joke pretending to be a religion and ended up as a religion pretending to be a joke.
Oh, I love that. That is the origin story of so many things.
It was like a satire of sort
Like
of a
Shakespeare.
playful satire of religion that was, they had like a holiday,
Is it
like
the goddess of
Tuesdays.
discord?
Yes, Eris, the goddess of
Okay.
discord, is at Hail Eris, and they had like Tuesday is a holiday, is the holy day, and you're forbidden to eat hot dog buns in Discordianism. So on Tuesday you celebrate the holiday by eating hot dog buns because you're forbidden to do so. So you should break that rule because you're a Discordian. Anyway, so and then people became devout Discordians. It's obviously a real, you can obviously actually worship Eris, the god of discord, by eating hot dog buns because you're not allowed to eat hot dog buns and never taking anything seriously, which is what Eris wants you to do. And it's like anything can be, which is why I always think the Pastafarians, there's like a sort of militant atheist thing where it's the flying spaghetti monster, and I'm like, you just wait. People will be authentically worshiping the flying spaghetti monster within 100 years. I promise you. Like there will be offshoots that are like, no, but he really is. His noodly appendages really do. Because you cannot suppress the human religious imagination. Anyway, so
People love to believe in things.
yeah, and it's like uh, it's like a yeah, believe in things and also use the symbolic and the evocative and the numinous to express truths about their relationship to
Yeah.
fundamental things. You know what I mean? It's like believe in sort of almost makes it seem like there's a fixed thing that you're like, oh, do you believe it or not? As opposed to it being a field of boundless creativity.
I believe you. That's not how I believe. That this could just be about my very specific relationship to belief, but I don't ever think of belief as a fixed thing. If anything, firm fixed belief seems contrary to me to the point of belief. Like to me it is much yeah, I know. It's a weird
Yeah.
way to say it,
No,
but it is
yeah.
much more about that creativity and that fluidity and that like part of this is again like especially coming at this from the angle of Islamic mysticism, although Ben knows this, but since we are technically on a podcast, like I also attend Jewish seders and Hindu kirtans and like spent the last year at a new agey school of witchcraft. Like I just love to learn all of the different ways to believe and worship and sing songs and come together in community and all of that. But I'll often find people who have this very sort of fragile, fixed perspective of it has to be this way, or I'm a bad person, or you're a bad person, or someone's going to hell, or blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And that to me actually feels like a lack of faith because
Hmm.
it imagines the forces that govern the universe as like an abusive parent who's going to take your lunch away if you don't worship them precisely correctly. And I
Right.
just don't believe in a version of the Almighty or whatever you want to call it that's that fragile. Like that just sounds depressing.
Yeah, right. Yes, I think that's right. I think, well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, I'm very much on the same page. I think that the word, I mean, so it's a semantic question about
Yeah.
what belief evokes for you. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because just because I think there's this kind of growing up Jewish in a very Protestant world, right? In a sort of a, in a Protestant based country, it's
Yeah.
the way that dogmatic belief in specific propositions, like the idea that belief is a matter of subscribing to specific logical propositions, like either you
Yeah.
think it or you don't think it, is a has been like this frustrating. Do you know what I mean? Like this extremely frustrating experience, right? Where
Yeah.
in a way it's like I feel like often I'm talking past. I often feel like in sort of mainstream American culture, like I'm caught in some argument in which fundamentalist Protestant Christians and atheists who come from that world are
Mhm.
arguing with each other and they agree on the terms of the debate. They
Yeah.
know what they're talking about. They think opposite things, but they think that but the universe of discourse is the same, and they agree on what is under discussion. And I
They've
am
got the
often
same heuristics,
frustrated.
they've got the same vocabulary. They're arguing yes versus no, but they have this the question is the same.
And I'm
Yeah.
often frustrated because they're like, this, and I'm like, that's not what? Because they're off, because people are often like, do you believe in God? And I'm like, what? Why is that a thing you would want to do with God?
Yeah.
Like, of all the things you could do with God, like, it seems pretty low on the list of interesting, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and it's interesting because when you say belief, I mean, what's interesting is as you were talking that I was thinking of, it's a linguistic thing. And I'm thinking that for me, the word belief in English is laden with this sort of propositional logic, yes or noism. And but emunah, which is, the closest equivalent in Hebrew, really isn't.
Mhm.
Like amen is from emunah, right?
Yeah.
And it's closer when you say faith. It's like faithfulness is closer, right? It's closer to
Yeah.
like a devoted engagement as opposed to
Devotion is the term that I
subscribing to a
like.
propositional idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because belief is like, if we're talking about belief, it's like, I don't know, I'm largely an empiricist. Like, I think there's many possible hypotheses, and the jury's out, right? I'm like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not even sure, actually, even about philosophy of science, I don't think belief is like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's also frustrating to be asked if I believe in evolution. I'm like, evolution's a really well-validated theory that seems to explain a lot of phenomena. What do you mean believe? What does believe mean in this context?
And that is the thing with me in science. Yeah, that's the thing.
That's a weird thing to think about science. Like, do you believe in string theory? I don't know. It seems interesting. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? Like, you can't actually believe in both quantum mechanics and general relativity as currently formulated, right? Because they're contradictory. They're not things to believe in, though. They're things
I
to
like the
predict
phrase "the
phenomena
evidence
with.
suggests." Yeah, it's things
Yeah, the
that is
evidence.
correct.
Yeah,
The
well, and
evidence
in a
suggests.
domain, quantum mechanics is absolutely rock solid at predicting phenomena in its domain, as is general relativity. It happens to be the case that the math doesn't work out for them both to be true. So
Yeah.
that's why there's this grand project to make a grand unified theory, and you get people like. You get various Nobel Prize winners, Weinberg, Dreams of a Final Theory, who's like, we're this close to unifying them, and then we will know the truth about everything. And I'm like, that just seems so
That
um,
sounds
and
boring.
to bring this around to writing again, since I feel like the need to do that periodically every once in a while. Um,
I do have a thing that I want to say before you bring it around to writing, which is that I remember like during COVID, before it was discovered that it was airborne, me remarking that, oh, it seems like this might be airborne. And my
uh-huh.
partner at the time, who was an engineer, like they had this very strong reaction of like, no, because it's a strain of this, and that's not how that works. And I was like,
Ah,
but the whole point of scientific discovery and inquiry is that we periodically discover that everything we thought wasn't true. And then we hang at the stake the guy who said that it wasn't, not hang at the stake, burn at the stake. You know what I mean? We kill the guy who said that it wasn't true. And then 100 years later, we go, oh shit,
no
he was
shit, that
right.
guy.
And lo and behold, it appears that COVID is
If
airborne.
science is advanced at all, it's largely by moving from burning at the stake to, I don't know, loss of tenure. Like it's, but yeah, just Kuhnian revolutions waiting for people to die off. But what I was gonna say is
Writing.
I wrote a story set 14 billion years in the future. And I was very proud of myself because I did all this research because it was sort of House Beyond Your Sky. And it was this wild sort of like they're in another universe, which is a parallel universe from our universe. And I put all this string theory in it and I figured out all these things and I worked out all the science. It was sort of like a very dramatically weird, but also hard science fiction-y story. And I think I showed it to Ted Chiang. And Ted Chiang said, what is the likelihood? This story is 14 billion years in the future, and you have like all this exact string theory. What is the likelihood that this will all still be considered to be the case in 14 billion years? Like, how do you think this is? You know what I mean? Like, what is the? You know what I mean? Like there's a sort of like it's scientifically right, but it's not meta scientifically right because
Yeah.
it's presuming this extremely unlikely idea. And so then I went back and I changed all of the brains to monads or whatever. Like I changed everything to suggestively philosophical things that aren't real science but could be. You know,
You gotta leave some things
because
to the imagination.
well, yeah, and it's like a level. It's like a kind. It's like sort of what we were talking earlier about camp and verisimilitude, where it's sort of like, um, at what game are you playing, and
Yeah.
what conjures, what are you asking them? In a way, it is like the camp thing. It's like by stepping into this is weird far future science. That's a different thing than being like this is accurate to the decimal point of like what we now think, right? Um, and it's kind of got to aesthetically fit the project that you're engaged in.
That's honestly people. So I have no idea what genre I write in. That's my agent's problem. It might be literary, it might be fantasy, it might be horror, it might be thriller. I think it's somewhere in the literary fantasy space. I don't know. But I will periodically be asked with the last book that I finished of like, "Oh, why don't you write science fiction because you're clearly working with a lot of science fiction tropes and ideas and da da da." And I was just like, because if I write science fiction, then I have to. I'm not saying every science fiction writer has to do this. I, being the person who I am going to have to do so much research to engage not only with the current science, but also with what might be wrong with the current
Right.
science. And if I'm working in fantasy, it's rooted in a lot of real folklore, but I get to read the folklore. And if there's something that doesn't fit the theme of the story, I get to just pluck it out, throw it over there, and make up something else.
Right,
And
because that's
that's
what
what
folklore
I
does.
find fun. Exactly. And I get to invent my own folklore while I'm at it.
I mean, what's interesting for me hearing that is I feel like, wait, how old are you? That's a terrible question to ask somebody in this context. I'm committing a great sin. I'm going to do the thing, which is obnoxious. Nobody should put up with this. But I was going to do the thing was like when I was I'm literally going to say when I was your age. Oh my God.
What age were you
What
going
a
to say though? I'm
what
going
a
to tell
messed
you how
up
old I
Gen
am, but
X.
first I want to know what age you were
Okay,
going to
when
say.
I was in my mid 30s
Yeah,
and a
I'm
writer,
33.
I feel like I would have said that, like, not so much science versus, but I loved abstract Borgesian, like fantasy where that was neither highly scientific nor highly historical, which I think is a
Mm-hmm.
problem you don't have. But where I was like, oh my God,
I
the
love the
research.
history. I want to know all of the I need to know what as close as I can to the truth so I can decide what I want to ignore
But I think
about.
I had the same anxiety about getting things wrong that you just expressed about science. I think I had that even more about history. I think I was like, if I try to write something set kind of in history, and I get and it's like, no, they didn't have, they didn't have that kind of scabbard. That's not
Well,
the.
that's why I'm
Didn't you
not
know
writing
that
historical
pleading?
fiction. I'm consulting on your historical fiction. My story is set in 2026, so I have other
There you
problems.
go. 2022, right. But it is interesting that it's kind of like this sort of like very folktale-ish, because you can't get folktale wrong because Once Upon a
Mhm.
Time is not, you don't know what the hem lengths or the grade of the carriage wheels is in Once Upon a Time, right?
Yeah.
Um, but that was sort of very comfortable, and I think it was kind of like it is interesting. I am not suggesting that you have any, like, I do not wish to suggest that your arc or anything is at all like me, and in fact, I'm very uncomfortable with having framed this as if we are not peers. Let us return to being just the same, but are totally different, but also um, let me relieve you from the burden of becoming me or anything. But it is interesting that I feel like I grew this muscle of like being yeah, like I'm still terrified in a way that I'm going to get things wrong, but interestingly I got sucked in despite that. And I think there is a certain cumulative thing with historical research. There was a certain cumulative thing of like the more I think both the more I started absorbing in it, for marinating in it, the more I felt like I could move freely
Mhm.
and not and catch the mistakes later or not catch them or whatever. Um, but also that like, and also, which I don't think I'm necessarily very good at yet, but also sort of that thing about elision, that thing about leaving things out that I think we were talking about before, where it's sort of like, and what you foreground and what you call the reader's attention to, and what you, anyway, I don't know. I just had a moment of recollection where I was like, oh yeah.
I do have this isn't quite. I have a resistance to writing historical fiction that is, I think, a little less about worrying that I'm going to get it wrong, because I feel like I will do as much research as I can and then inevitably I will get something wrong.
Yeah.
But I do find that less in SFF, but still in SFF, but definitely in litfic, there are certain boxes that one gets put in when one is not white. And often South Asian writers in particular are really expected to write historical fiction.
Oh, interesting.
And it's like South Asian writers are supposed to write historical fiction. Middle Eastern and Afghani writers are supposed to write about the horrors of war, which, to be fair, I do. And just like I could go off on a tangent with like all of the different like types of not white that I am and like what is expected. But the thing about the way in which,
what are South Asians in Tanzania supposed to write?
We're not supposed to exist. You can't. If I'm in Tanzania, I need to be either white or black. Like that's not. There's no space for that in fiction. But I think we would probably also be expected to write historical fiction, frankly, and it would have to be very sad, and there would have to be sisters, and there would have to be drama, and someone would have to have an affair with somebody, and someone's mom would have to die. And
I like how this writes itself, even though you're like, it doesn't exist, and also here's the entire plot.
I'm just kind of clumping together the different.
It all sounds very. That sounds very plausible. Like I hear you.
But I just don't like the way that removes our existence from the present day. Like it is, and even it's, again, in fantasy, it's a little. There are frankly few enough South Asians in fantasy, and so many of them are like, well, South Asian Americans, because there are actually a number of South Asians from the actual continent, the actual subcontinent, who are writing all sorts of like weird and fascinating and different and groundbreaking and genre breaking things. But when you're a person of color, like in the US, it's not that you can't do it. It's just that you're fighting upstream. And I love to fight upstream. But it is this thing where with fantasy, it's much more likely that it's going to be kind of like generic fantasy India, and you're fighting the British Empire. And it's not that I don't want to read about the South Asian lesbians fighting the British Empire, because I do. But it is, again, just like, I just remember reading this book, and I'm not going to name it because the author is young and it wasn't a terrible book. But it was just so much of a like fantasy brown women fighting the patriarchy and their horrible oppressive society, and just like it being that thing of like, this is the kind of book that you have to write before you get to write the book that you feel like writing. And
the obligatory.
So I guess all of which is to say, I might at some point write historical fiction, because I don't even dislike the idea of writing historical fiction. But I dislike the idea of, especially because I've been ghostwriting for a very long time. Like there are a number of bestsellers that I wrote that don't have my name on them. So I don't consider myself a new writer, but in terms of writing under my own name, I'm very new. I don't want the first thing published under my name to put me into that kind of box. I'm sure someone will put me in a box anyway, but like that's their fucking problem. Like I'm not going to do that, you know?
And I think that's an interesting general thing. I think that's a useful urge. Like I think there's two things you're saying, and one is kind of like a creative thing and one is a marketing thing, right? There's a marketing thing, which is sort of like you can get essentially typecast. Like you could submit to like what they want you, what they're comfortable with slotting you into identity wise, and then that can be like a self-fulfilling prophecy or an expectation or limiting. Like that's a marketing thing. And then there's a accompanying creative thing, which is kind of like, this is expected of me, and for that very reason I pull away from it, right? And I think that's a really, it's kind of like the thing where a really useful book to read is a book that you find compelling but also really irritating. Do you know what I mean? Like a really useful thing is a thing you're like, no, come on. Because if you just can't relate to it and you're like, whatever, then that's not inspiring. And if it's like so good that it does everything and you can only be in awe of it, then you're like, wow, I guess I should maybe try writing something like that. But if it's like really good, but also no, come on, then you're like, can't wait to get to the keyboard, right? You know what I mean?
I mean, that's the basis of fan fiction, isn't it? It's stuff
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very compelling, but also they should have done this specific
Right.
thing differently.
Yeah, that sort of fix-it-fic urge, I think, is at the base, but it's the basis of lots of, I mean, I think lots of like kind of great stuff. You can see that impulse, you know what I mean? You can see that, I don't know, I'm sort of thinking of Nate Stevenson, who wrote She-Ra and the Princess of Power, my favorite cartoon.
I definitely wrote a book in high school that, I mean, I wrote it in high school, so it's
Yeah.
not the best, but I reread it recently. It was like quite remarkable for something written in high school. But I don't think I knew at the time, but I can definitely see in retrospect, like, oh, I wrote this because Joss Whedon's Firefly pissed me off so much
yeah, exactly.
that I had to write this entire book
Exactly.
about the things about it that I liked that I wish he hadn't done so annoyingly. So yeah, it's a great, spite can be a great basis for
Yeah, I don't know if it's
not even
spite is one thing.
frustration.
Yeah, like because it's like an unfulfilled promise. It like beckons to you this kind of like, if only you'd like move, get the hell away, you know, let me have the keyboard. You know what I mean? It's this sort of like you've been, because it's sort of half done. It's like there's a world, or there's certain elements of it that are like inviting you in, and then there's something you very much have to fix urgently. And I don't know,
I do think that's absolutely a great source of inspiration, but I do think that reading something that you just really love, especially for me, something that is very effective as a source of inspiration is the how did you do that? Like, for me, I am terrifyingly good at predicting twists. I can remember every twist that I didn't predict, and it's like,
I wonder if this is related to you trouncing everybody at Mafia.
It is probably related to me trouncing everybody at Mafia. But The Good Place, which we were talking about earlier, is so effective.
Now, don't spoil
it. Because I'm not going to spoil it, but there is a twist that I got halfway. And the half that I got wound up being the twist toward the end. And the thing about that was so impressive, generally speaking, there are two kinds of twists for me, not in the world, for me in life. There's one, the kind of twist that you have set up, which means that I see it coming. And there's two, the kind of twist that I don't see coming because it's so random and so poorly set up. Like the best twist, you should be able to rewatch, reread, re-experience from the beginning and see all of the places where they seeded that.
Yeah, it's the feeling of inevitable surprise. Like it's shocking and inevitable is the ideal twist.
And the Good Place having that thing where like I knew there was a twist. I got part of the twist. It was related enough that I didn't feel random or like it didn't feel poorly set up, but it was different enough that I was still like shocked and delighted. And they also effectively seeded the end of this 4-season show, which they didn't even know if they were going to get 4 seasons of. Like that especially in this very like sitcom drama format where they need to have a different plot each episode, was so effective. And I still don't know how they did that. And I still don't know that I've achieved being able to do that, which means that it's always like every time I try to write a twist, that is fueling me of, can I get this to a point?
Get to there? Yeah. No, I agree. That's another important kind of text, is the text that you're like, because that's another kind of yearning, like where it's like, oh, if only I could do this, but I don't know how yet. But there's two reactions to that, where you could kind of be just like, well, I don't need to do it because somebody did it. Or you could be like, oh, maybe this time. Like maybe this time I'll be able to capture that lightning in a bottle is also a source of motivation. I feel like they're somewhat different in the sense, I mean, I think you need both. I just I just reread Laurie Marks's Fire Logic, one of my absolute favorite books. Do you know that series, Elemental Logic? Oh, it's amazing. It's very much and I was thinking of that when we were talking about like people reacting to things, because I feel like it's a sort of, it's epic fantasy with a sort of scale and depth of like the Lord of the Rings or something, but with this very humane, queer, adult vision of the world. It makes you look at Lord of the Rings and be like, uh, you know, it's sort of childish. Do you know what I mean? Lord of the Rings is like, there are bad guys, and if we beat the bad guys, then everything will be good.
I mean, that's the logic of war, right?
Yeah, and and Elemental Logic is very much a story about war, and it's very much a story in which there is real like oppression and resistance and fighting back, and also in which it is like the healing part is so much more important. Like the healing and restoring and rebuilding and coming together, including the people who have been doing terrible things. Like the vision is not just a vision of like beating the bad guys and winning, but a vision of like actually truly healing a ruptured world.
Speaking of a source of frustration and something that I wish that there were more of, I wish that there were more books set where the like defeat of the evil empire or whatever is the beginning of the story instead
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
end. Because it's like,
yeah.
all right, we've overthrown them. Yay,
Right. And now
cheers,
what?
fade to
And now
black.
what?
Yeah, there's the
Exactly.
and now what?
And basically, I hope it's not too much of a spoiler to say that it's not the beginning, but
Yeah,
it's like the
it's not the
midpoint
end.
ish
Yeah,
of Elemental Logic is like where Tolkien would have ended the story,
yeah.
because it's really not about that. And even in the first book, and I remembered that, but I didn't remember that even in the first book, it's already clear that like it's very clear that like the actual solution here is not that the free peoples conquer the orcs, but something very much metier and queerer. Anyway, so great book. But that is the kind of book where I that's in that category where I just like, oh God, how did she do this? You know what I mean? And it's to be aspired to. And I feel like that's a different, like a book that is sort of like ambitious and flawed in a way that appeals to you is sort of an immediate kick. Like if you're like, oh, I can do that, like move over, let me at the keyboard. That's like an immediate call to action, right? There's something immediate about being like, no, this way.
Yeah.
And the other thing where it's like this thing that's like maybe this time I'll get it right. I feel like is a deeper, slower. You know what I mean? You kind of have to chew on that. It's not like you immediately know what to do. It's like a thing that seeps into you, and like you know what I mean? Now you have this yearning. Um, but I don't, but it's, you know what I mean? So I think you kind of need
That's
both.
most of my writing process though. Like yeah, I tend to spend a lot of time chewing and contemplating and having ideas and emotions and
Yeah.
often really struggling to write and then writing in like rapid bursts like um
Yeah.
which is kind of a new thing that I'm learning about myself because as I mentioned earlier, like I've done a lot of ghostwriting. And with
Yeah.
ghostwriting, I absolutely like I already know what I'm doing. So it does go like I can churn out a book in 3 months. Like it's just done and it's usually very polished.
Uh-huh.
Um and like
Because
first
you're
draft to
less
last
invested, or because it's all sort of specified, like what the boundaries are, or like why is it?
because it is not it requires a lot of skills, but I don't want to say creativity isn't one of them, but like I'm not creating often all of it. Like either I'll have a client who because it's nonfiction is the other thing.
Uh-huh.
So
Oh, yeah.
the either I'll have a client who like knows all this stuff, very brilliant, has ideas, has concepts, has whatever, but it's a mess. And so I'm creating the structure. Or I've got someone who kind of has a structure, has an outline, has that,
Yeah.
and just doesn't necessarily know how to words it. And in both of those cases, the actual fundamental what is this story about is an answer that already exists. And maybe they need my help poking and like pulling and figuring that out. But when I'm writing my own thing,
Right.
I
It's
really
from
have to
nothing.
figure out, that part. And so I used to get really frustrated with myself if I know that I'm a really fast writer and this is taking forever, not because I'm writing slowly, but because I'm just sitting here being like, I got nothing, man. And I have a dear friend who was just kind of like, have you thought about just sitting with your eyes closed for 15 minutes? And I was like, I said, meditating? And the thing that's funny about that is a lot of times I meditate a lot. When I try to meditate, I get frustrated because I'll be having story ideas. It's like, no, I'm trying to meditate. But that worked so well. No, this is a tip for writers, especially if you've got ADHD and you're easily bored. This is going to be torture, but it's really effective. Just set a timer and close your eyes, and you're not allowed to write until just close your eyes and breathe. And you're not allowed to write until the timer is up. And by the end of that, actually, this is the same frustration. We've hacked to the frustration thing. By the end of it, you will be dying to write. You will be exploding with ideas. Or it might not work, but
for a while, I had a similar thing, not quite the same thing, but there's a couple of things that reminds me of. One of which is that when I was years ago, when I was really in a writing slump and feeling burned out and kind of, I don't know, run dry, I usually had an ambition to write a certain amount a day, because I like to write every day if I can, because in some ways this like anxiety and terror and doubt that gets in my way, like the best cure for it is having written yesterday, right? Like, like it's so much smaller if I wrote yesterday, because it sort of feels like, oh, well, whatever happens today, I don't know, I'll write again tomorrow. Whereas if I haven't written in a while, there's this high pressure. So I try to write. But when I was really when I was in this kind of state where I was having a lot of trouble and doubt, I also imposed a maximum. Like I was allowed to write, like I tried to write at least 200 words, but I wasn't allowed to write more than, I don't know, 400 words or something. Like I got to stop. And the thing about that is precisely sort of what you're saying about the frustration.
Infuriating.
It's infuriating. The next day I'm like, come on, fuck it. Let me, you know what I mean? Like I've been waiting the whole time, like twitching. And that's similar to a technique that I've heard called parking the car downhill, where, you basically don't stop your writing day at a stopping point. Like rather than rather than finishing the end of the chapter and being like, okay, good, I'm done with the day, because then the next day you're starting from nothing. You like intentionally stop mid sentence so that it's like you're like give me, I just want to finish the. So anyway, that's.
I am feeling tortured as you speak. I'm feeling like I need to like grab a notebook and write down words just to protect me from this concept,
from this horror. But it's the same principle as you're not allowed to write for you have to sit with your eyes closed and you're not allowed to write. It's like it builds up this head of steam where you're like, now finally, I can.
Finally.
I think the parking the car downhill or the interrupting or the like not completing is like useful also in a long project, like in a marathon, where you're just like trying to slog your way through, because the difficulty is sort of that you want to you want to keep momentum, but you can just despair of getting anywhere. You know what I mean? And so it's like there's that extra kick of being like, finally, I get to finish what I was saying yesterday.
I've been having a very strange experience with the book that I'm currently working on. So the last book that I finished, I wrote the first draft sequentially, like, first chapter, then second chapter, then all of that. And it was very, very long and quite messy. And I had to do a lot of rewrites on that thing. But what was frustrating was, from a purely prose level, it was beautiful. So truly hundreds of thousands of very beautiful words will never see the light of day because the story structure didn't work.
Right.
And the ultimate version still had very pretty words, but it was half the length, and most of those words were added after the fact because I figured out plot. And I was also like constantly, like every time my agent sent me a draft with like some notes, I would say, hey, what if I added a completely new subplot? And he would always be like, sure, why not? So one of the main subplots I added in the fourth or fifth draft of this thing. And so this time I'm not letting myself do that. Like I'm writing a very messy, out of order draft, and some of it is still quite pretty, but I'm trying very hard to, like, not all of it is in English.
Not
Sometimes I'll
polished.
deliberately write in the wrong tense. Like I'll do the names like an initial instead. I have a character whose name is going to be either Josh or Jonah, so I'm just calling him Jay. And just
so
like,
you're forced to revise it. Yeah,
yeah,
you're forced
and
to go back
writing
to
it down in a notebook or writing it in email drafts, like not even letting myself make a document yet. And it's really freed me up to add things to scenes that I've already written, and to just be like, oh, I had this idea and I wrote this like Bitty Bob scene and I have no idea where it's going to go. And I just figured out that actually this Bitty Bob scene that I thought was going to happen in the first third can be really, really important in the last third. And just that process of discovery has been really exciting. And I realized the extent to which I had so much of what I need in my creative process. And it's so ridiculous because I'm a creativity coach and I tell my clients this, and it's the very classic. This is also the therapist problem of like, you give such great advice and then you don't do it.
Heal myself.
Of like, oh, right, I need to let this be fun. And not just in a like, I am happier when it is fun, even though that is true, because unfortunately I don't find that intrinsically motivating. I should work on that. But also, I will be more excited and more creative and more motivated, like, if I let myself have a bunch of emotions. And and I think that that's why
it's more real if it's more fun.
But it's
because
also,
it's deeper to the the well springs of creativity. Like you can't actually create without getting back to this childlike playfulness.
It creates something usually that you want to write, which is not necessarily, like, a lot of people aren't necessarily doing that. Like, they're creating something they think is going to be good, not necessarily something that they would want to read. And when I say fun, I'm not saying this is all yakety sax. Like, this is a fairly dark book. But that's also why I get really frustrated when I hear the advice "kill your darlings" thrown around, because I do think it's really important that you need to be willing to cut stuff that doesn't work, even if you like it. And I am very willing to, like, sure, I will have a little tantrum about it in my heart, but like, I will cut things if they don't work. But that's, I think, what that phrase is supposed to mean.
That advice gets turned into,
It gets turned
that's what
into
it's supposed to mean, is be ruthless when necessary. But exactly, like
remove the
that's
bits you love.
Exactly.
It's like, no, build the story around the bits you love so they matter.
I think that's two things, actually. I think there's a misinterpretation where people think "kill your darlings" means, take out the fun parts, because that's an overzealousness of showing that you're ruthless enough to, you have to be ruthless. You have to be willing to be ruthless and cut things that are self-indulgent. But like, overzealously proving that you're ruthless by often kills the soul of it. But I think it's also an aesthetic fad or something. I think that all art forms tend to swing between periods of technical virtuosity and ornateness and periods of raw authenticity. And I think there's a similar thing with, like, you know what I mean? Or like opulence and there's something where there's, this sort of the "Kill Your Darlings" also comes out of the discomfort with the goofy, the sentimental, the over the top, the extreme. It's like the Bronte sisters saying about, I forget which Bronte sister says, that Jane Austen is amazingly talented, but I wouldn't want to live in this cold, austere, you know what I mean? These soulless, like miniatures crafted with ultimate precision, but they don't, but without any life, like that. That's like that. Yeah, and that's the swing in the other direction from Austen to the Brontes. But Austen's reacting to, with Northanger Abbey, she's satirizing the Gothic. She's reacting to this overheated, over the top, and she's like, and that movement goes back and forth. But the "Killing Your Darlings," I think, partly comes out of people being like not wanting that, because I love a magpie bricolage of absurd over the topness, right? I mean, but but that's an aesthetic. It is known. But I have learned to exercise some restraint sometimes, but like the degree of I mean, it's like a lot of things are like that. Also, the like sentimentality, which is another thing that the Brontes and Austen were sort of fighting about, right? Which
Yeah.
is sort of like how much emotion is on the page, how much do you ask of, you know what I mean? Like, and that's a slider which, the Brontes found Austen chilly, and Austen found the Gothic, sentimental, and it's like that for various readers that's sort of finely tuned, you know what I mean? Where it's like it's easily too much or too little.
The concern that I frequently have is just sincerity, because I find that both the melodrama and the pared downness can either be tools of sincerity or they can be tools to avoid sincerity, and that's
Interesting.
I have a different reaction based on that. Like I've read stuff, especially because I love poetry. I absolutely love poetry, and I've read these like very quiet, spare,
Yeah.
simple focus on the details poems where everything is left to the imagination that nevertheless capture this enormous amount of emotion. And I've read stuff that's very like cold and spare that just kind of feels, I can't say like a robot wrote it anymore because now we know how robots write and it's so much worse than that. But just
Now
feels
exactly. Now
soulless.
robots are drunk. They're like the opposite. We used to think robots were austere and cold, and
Oh no,
now they're
so
like
much
over the
melodrama.
top, messy drunk, randos. Yeah.
And with drama, it's the same, where there is a level of heightenedness that can really allow emotions to come true. And there's a level of heightenedness that lets everything be a little insincere because it's so performative.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, which is partly just comes down to saying like if you can pull it off, like
Yeah,
either
part
way.
of it's
But yeah, there's that
if
like
you can pull it off, but I almost like which of these makes you more uncomfortable? And I almost would say try the one that makes you more uncomfortable because probably the reason it makes you feel uncomfortable is because it's
yeah,
making you deal with a level of sincerity that you don't want to deal with.
like sincere as opposed to genuine as opposed to authentic. It's kind of an interesting space, but
Well,
I'm not sure I have anything interesting to say about it.
I think the difference for me of sincere, because I think sincere has to entail genuine/authentic, but there's a level of vulnerability required as well. Like someone can be very genuine and authentic without necessarily being
Mm,
vulnerable. And I feel
yeah,
like so much of like the push pull of our time and like going way back, so much of why like discussing the Israel Palestine conflict with any sort of
yeah.
humanity is so difficult is I think because we have this weird in the US culture of simultaneous like performativity and numbness that makes sincerity really, really, really difficult. And what I'm looking for in my art more than anything else is to feel a sense of genuine connection to emotion. And there are so many different ways to do that. And sometimes it is the understated way, and sometimes it is the overtop way, and sometimes it's neither of those or in between or whatever that is. But so often trends in art, like whatever the big trend is in art, in some way or another, I find it winds up pulling away from the like deeper connection and vulnerability because you get to just kind of hide in following whatever the wave is.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of like the aesthetic once it's reified. Like the reaction, Bronte's reaction to Austen being like, but we want the wide open heath and the, whatever. And Austen's reaction, they are in fact moments of it's interesting to put it together because they're in a way reactions to something that has become a reified thing that you do. Like by the time Austin's reacting to the Gothic, people know how the Gothic goes. They know the moves. They know this is how you make one. And she's like appalled at the falseness of it. But then the same is true. You know what I mean? Like in both the pull in
Yeah.
both directions is the moment when somebody is being like, "Come on." There's a it sort of reminds me of Alan Moore talking about Watchmen. Did you
Mhm.
read Watchmen?
I did read Watchmen a long while ago, but I remember it in a surprising amount of detail. Anyway, say the thing you were going to say. I am
Well, it's
reasonably familiar with.
Watchmen was. I mean, I read Watchmen as it came out. I read Watchmen issue by issue, so that we had like
I
our
had
own.
a
You know,
hardcover.
I know. Like most people have read it. Like, you have to be around in a specific moment in 1987 to be reading it like as it came out issue by
Then
issue.
I wasn't
And
born.
like, We've gotten there. Yes, the year I joined the coven, and in fact, we were waiting for like issue 12, and we had all kinds of theories about what was it going to happen that were totally wrong, and like Mothman was really important. Anyway, and he was.
Sorry to interrupt, but just before I say this, that's actually like a flex that you could definitely use if we're ever debating witchcraft. Of like, I was in a coven before you were even born.
Briefly.
But go on.
Anyway, I mean, if I'd been in a coven hundreds of years before you were born, that would be a flex regarding witchcraft.
That would be a heck of a flex, yeah.
Okay, like just apropos Agatha all along. Anyway, so the Watchmen was mind-blowing at the time. It's hard to appreciate how different it was from, I mean, it was in a kind of an era where there's some other stuff going on that was edgy in a way, and there was like Frank Miller's Dark Knight, and there was Howard Chaykin and whatever, but like it was and Sandman was not long after that. You know, there was sort of like this new like taking comics seriously vibe, but Watchmen specifically is so well crafted, and also was this sort of mind-blowing way of taking the idea of superheroes seriously with this kind of psychological realism. Like, what if there were people who dressed up in costumes and ran around beating up people they thought were evildoers?
Yeah.
How would that actually function? Would it be a good idea? Like, you know, what if people had like awesome godlike powers? Would that work out well? So there's this way in which that's what Watchmen was doing, and the point of it was taking seriously the conventions that had just come to be seen as conventions. They're just being, look, you know, superheroes. So you put on a costume, fight crime, you know, superheroes. And being like, but what are we saying? Which is kind of a return to like Bob Kane. You know, if you have Batman, like issue 3 of Batman, where he's riding around machine gunning mutant giants, you know, that's like a kind of weird wildness of the pulps that's like, you know, and then it becomes like pro forma, like that's what superheroes do. And it's like getting underneath like that's what superheroes do, to like, what if you take this seriously? But what Alan Moore said about it is that what everybody took from it was not like that deconstructionist move of getting to the roots and like taking it seriously. What they took from it was the dark, cynical, like superheroes are just fucked up, you know, assholes. And then you got this vast body of literature like The Boys and all this stuff. Yeah, right, which is the grimdark superheroes were then a huge fad, and Alan Moore was so fucking sick of it and was like, God, if I'd known that I was creating what we were doing was like even worse than the superhero comics. Like before, the superhero comics were kind of like trite, and they'd ended up in a cul-de-sac, and they were repeating it. But like, you know, they were at least sort of happy-go-lucky. And now it's the same, except the trope is now that they're all fucking asshole monsters. And he was like, that's so worse. That's even worse. We made it worse. Anyway, but that's, you know, I think that's the thing about sincerity is an interesting North Star or guideline for that, because in a way it's like, it's like once you are seeing the armature of the tropes as like what you're supposed to do, it's no longer right. Like that's the thing where you drift away. You take your eye off the ball.
You're doing it because it's the thing that you're supposed to do instead of because it's the thing that has the emotional resonance that fits the story. And I think you can do that in a way that is very, I don't want to say self-aware, intentional. There we go. That's the word. A way that's intentional, but the more you're following an existing formula, the less likely that is. Like, absolutely, I've read stuff that is very formulaic and also really brilliantly, beautifully sincere, like Lilo and Stitch, but
Lilo and Stitch.
Lilo and Stitch actually isn't that formulaic. That's a terrible example. Put that away.
Yeah,
put that one away.
That's kind of like
Lilo and Stitch is not formulaic, but Lilo and Stitch is using tropes that we know. But that's the thing. Tropes don't have to be. I don't know. Lilo and Stitch was a bad example. I was trying to think of a Disney movie because Disney movies seem like the way to do it, but that was a bad one. I'll think of another one later. It's fine.
But I know what you mean. It's like the tropes are pieces of reader expectation. Like the reader knows certain things and knows certain moves, and then that's something that you can use at like paper
Yeah.
dolls. Like you can build
And you
your
can use
story
it
that's
really
truly your
effectively.
story, and you can, you can make it out of, you can bricolage it out of these existing, I mean, Shakespeare's all tropes, right?
With a
Like
degree of mix
Shakespeare's
and
all
match.
like, like Shakespeare is.
Well, I would say that a lot of Shakespeare's stuff was not particularly sincere.
Well, fair, but I mean, like a lot of interesting. So you would say a lot of Shakespeare stuff is not particularly sincere. Interesting. I don't know. That's like that. That does bring me back to this question of sincerity, because and whether sincerity, because Shakespeare is definitely, it's not confessional raw openness, but it's like definitely like Shakespeare is not following a trend, or like that is really what Shakespeare wants to say. Do you know what I mean? I mean, maybe it depends on the play.
Well, it depends on the play, but there are definitely some Shakespeare plays where he was making some interesting points, but I can often feel, especially because like he was writing on commission for the king, right? Like it's not like he had actually that much creative control. There's a lot of plays, and I would say Macbeth. I'm not in a theater, and I still feel like, oh gosh, I said the name. Like plays like that, or I mean, the Othello and the Merchant of Venice are a whole bag of worms. But like there are plays like that where it's like I can almost feel this the sincerity, like trapped in this wall, kicking and screaming, trying to like the push out this actual meaning underneath the framework of the story that needs to be told. And I also think that we tend to, it's very hard for us to really know the extent to which Shakespeare was or wasn't writing to trend. We because there's not actually that much, we only know what survived, and what survived was the stuff that was the most famous, which means that sometimes it was the stuff that was weird, and often the things that become famous are either the stuff that are weird and interesting or the stuff that are following the existing tropes in like a very effective manner. But there's this strong tendency with Shakespeare in particular to be like, oh, he invented this, he invented that, he invented it. It's like, no, he probably didn't. He's just the first recorded version of it. But what I was actually thinking about when I remarked on the lack of sincerity, I was thinking about his sonnets, which is not necessarily fair, because like with the plays, I feel like it's so much harder to say, because again, like he's writing on commission for the king. There's stuff he has to say. There's stuff he can't say. There's stuff. Richard III is another example of a play where I felt like there was a story he wanted to tell, and there was a story that he needed to tell that he tacked on to the end at the last second.
Sure.
It feels almost like, you know, the old like lesbian Pulp Fiction where you just tear out the last page where she dies. Like it almost feels like that.
Right.
Just tear off the end of Richard III and you see more of the story he was trying to tell.
Interesting.
But I feel like Shakespeare's sonnets are such a brilliant example of like sincerity getting lost in form, because when you look at the original Italian sonnet, they're going to try to explain this in the least annoying technical manner possible. You have the first chunk where you're expressing an idea very beautifully. And then you have the last bit where you're turning the idea on its head. And Shakespeare took the Italian sonnet and created the English sonnet, where the last bit is only a couple lines. So in the Italian sonnet, it's often like you have the first bit, which is beautiful and poetic and sort of like following the conventions, and the last bit where they're actually exploring the emotional messiness. It's like the second act of a Sondheim musical. And Shakespeare instead had a two-liner. So instead it's just like a clever quippy like, ha ha ha!
Right.
And really like skipping over the deeper emotional aspects of it. And I know that Shakespeare sonnets are not necessarily within the scope of sci-fi fantasy, but I do think that they're a really good example of ways in which form can hinder, I would say. Form can hinder. And there are people who have, it's like, it can be a helpful framework, like it can be helpful training wheels up to a point. and then it becomes a hindrance, and then you can go right back around to people who are like truly skilled, who can work within the form while also doing things that are different and interesting. But there's this huge middle piece where it is a bit like I said, it's a hindrance. Like, it gets in the way of actually telling the deeper, richer, messier story, because there's this framework that's much tidier and much more familiar. And that doesn't mean it's not, like, often that results in like fun stories, like fast stories. Like, I'm not actually anti-formula in stories, but those are almost never going to be the stories that stick with me. I'll enjoy them while I'm reading them, but usually what sticks with me is kind of the moment where you pull the curtain back.
The idea of formula is interesting because it's I think there are people who very naturally inhabit. It's almost like I think I don't know. There's some things that I'm a little suspicious of the idea of formula in certain ways. There are some things that are literally a formula. There are literally like guides to save the cat. This, at this minute of the screenplay, this happens. At this minute of the screenplay, right? Like, there are literal formulas. And then there's like a way that formulaic sometimes gets used as a high-low art thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like they're saying, oh, the comics are formulaic, or romance novels are formulaic, when it's like, well, they're not actually more or less formulaic on average than
there are ways that becomes very snobby. That's not
like the fancy
legitimate.
literary professor sleeping with his student. You know what I mean? Is like absolutely like this sort of formulaic lit fic thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, or like a lot of stuff that gets lauded as brave and courageous and different and all of that. Like, a lot of that stuff is itself, you're still following a formula. It's like there's the formula that people that find enjoyable, and there's the formula that wins awards, and it's like, okay, these are still both formulas,
right?
Though.
And also there's a distinction between. I mean, so in a way, it's a reaction you have to something that's not your thing, in a way. I think when the people who are enamored of the award-winning sad professor story read a romance novel or a comic book that they are not particularly, that's not their thing, what is salient to them is the formulaic aspects. What's salient to them is that, there's a person who can fly, and there's a villain,
that's
and the villain has a plan.
People who don't have enough self-awareness to recognize the formulas and the things that they like.
Well, right, but I guess what I'm saying is that, like, it's easy at a distance. If you're not familiar with it, the salient things are going to be the formulaic things, in a way. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, what's going to stand out is the things that are like, oh, I see, it's always like this and like this and like this. And for somebody that's their thing, those are like the walls. Those are like structural. Like, you don't necessarily,
they're building blocks.
Like, that's not what and you're, in a way, it's like if those are taken as read and they're part of the natural armature, it's like the poem having, the structure it has. It's like the sonnet being like, oh, this is the first part, this is the second part. Like, if you read sonnets all the time, I expect you're not like, oh, look, it's A-B again, right? You're like, like that's already like, anyway, but
that's sort of what I mean about the final. So I really enjoy tropes. Like, I really enjoy tropes done well, and I think that, as you say, they can both be very effective shortcuts, and there's so much emotional richness already in a trope and in what a trope signifies that you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. But it
has this elusive power by virtue of having this ancestry of resonances that it goes back to, right?
But it is one of those things where I do genuinely feel like some of and again, I'm struggling to think of a good example. Now my brain is giving me Shrek, but I actually don't think Shrek is like, I think it was doing things that were different and now everyone's copying it. But Shrek is like it is a really perfect 3-act structure. Like, it's really following all the beats of the 3-act structure. And in fact, when I am teaching classes on structure and I'm like, what do you do? Like, the end of Act 2 is the point where you would have Hallelujah play. And that almost always works. That kind of Dark Night of the Soul moment. I lost my train of thought. The point is, I think that you can do really, really beautiful and interesting and fun and clever things within the context of following a script, fitting a pattern, etc., etc. But at the same time, it's easier not to, which is why I find that it's again one of those things where most stories I read that do follow that clear, and I do think of it as more about the structure than necessarily about tropes, because tropes don't entail formulaic. It's more like following a structure that,
Like
like,
beats.
that's a formula. That's not inherently a bad thing. But often those stories I find a little forgettable, even if I really enjoy them as I'm reading them, in part because it's almost like listening to a pop song, except pop songs are very catchy, but it's kind of like part of why a pop song is really satisfying to your brain is that your brain is anticipating the note, and then it
Yeah.
gets the happy little dopamine burst from it being the note that you anticipated. And that's often kind of the experience that I'm having of like, oh, and then this is going to happen, and then that happens. And it's like, oh, this is going to happen, and then that happens. But when something surprises me in a way that feels really intentional, that's something that I'm going to remember for a very long time. And the problem with that is that there are a lot of twists that themselves have become so much the standard that
Sure.
then, like, for example, I have read so many short stories in the past several months that's like, there are monsters, and then the girl who is, or the queer person or the trans person becomes the monster, and we are
Right.
reclaiming
Final girl is monster. Yeah.
yes, we are reclaiming the, like, Disney villainification of queerness. And it's like, that's great, that's fun, that's super lovely. After I've read 30 of those, they all kind of feel the same. And the main thing I remember is like, oh yeah, and that one, she was an octopus. That was
that's
cool.
partly like steam engine time. That's partly like you don't know when you're writing. Like that happens to, like, I think all editors of anthologies and whatever find that is like all of a sudden everyone's sending this thing. Each person's having that's often is sincere. That often is
Yeah,
that everyone is having their
absolutely.
reaction of the moment, and they all happen to be having the same reaction because it's the zeitgeist. And so then it becomes, and then then it's sort of like there's some randomness and also some some of them capture the zeitgeist better than others, and like some of them maybe remain as the one that people that propagates itself, sometimes out of random factors and sometimes because it hit the nail on the head somehow. But I think it's interesting because I think there are two different things one could mean by formula, and because there's a literal meaning of like
It's true. We
literally
should
like
be
on this
defining terms
page.
before we babble about them.
I mean, well, I
We
know that's
being
fine.
me.
Ah, we we don't need to stick to that formula. Just what occurs to me is that there's like the Save the Cat style, like there are these beats, and the thing that it feels to me about that is that there are like it's almost like uh it's almost like straightness. It's like here are some desires that we have decided are normative, and like you should feel this way. And then some
I was
people,
literally just thinking about it in the context of whiteness, of like, oh, the cultural hegemony of Save the Cat.
but stay
But
with me
go
on
on.
straightness for a minute. Stay with me on
Yeah,
straightness. Like, these are desires
it's very difficult for me to do, Ben, but I'm going to try.
Yeah. Imaginative exercise. So, but what I mean is there are these desires that we are enshrining them as normative. And the thing is that it's like some people have those desires. Probably not as many as, you know what I mean? Like, because because even dividing the landscape into like straight, bi, asexual, gay, whatever, is like an arbitrary, like, of course, everything is much messier and complex and more tangled under the hood. So it's really like, how well can you accommodate to one of the cultural categories that like the world is presented you with? But like sometimes it just works, and it feels like sometimes writers who are really super popular, like a Stephen King kind of a writer, um, and people try to imitate that, and they're like, oh, I should do that because he does this and this and this, and then they do it, but that doesn't really work. Their heart's not really in it. Because a lot of the time people who do
Oh,
that,
the Gone Girl
they
problem.
really, because a lot of times the people who are the great at that, that's because that really is their sensibility. That they are at the same time hitting what are formulaic beats or whatever with complete honesty, like Paul Menard authoring Don Quixote in the 20s and meaning every word. In the Borges story, where he goes and writes Don Quixote word for word, except he means it, and so it means something totally different than it did when Cervantes wrote it, because of course
that's why it comes right back to the sincerity thing of and that's why, because I know that people tend to all the time like make fun of romance novels if they're so formulaic and whatnot, and like I find that yes, sometimes, because romance novels are one of the very few areas where you can actually like make a living as an author, there will be people who are just kind of writing to the formula, but so often there is so much sincerity in romance novels. And so like that's so often what people are talking about when they complain about formula. And for me, it's like, that's sort of never what I'm talking about, because you've taken this formula and used it as a vehicle to have a lot of emotions that are genuine for you.
Yeah, and it's partly the inhabiting. Like, it's whether you are, and in some ways it's just like, does that formula fit for you and for your project? Because in some ways, if you fully inhabit the formula, it can be completely like compelling and authentic. But then the problem is not like with the analogy with straightness. Like, the problem is not that there are these specific desires. It's like the corralling everybody into, right? It's like the idea that if you don't, like, you know what I mean? And so, then people end up trying to conform to the formula when that isn't actually the thing that they're called to write.
Well, it also, when it isn't actually the thing that made it work. Like, one of my absolute favorite books of all time is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. And Gone Girl was extremely successful. And Gone Girl is an extraordinarily good book. And like, it's very cynical, but it's very emotionally resonant. And after the wild success of Gone Girl, you had a stream of books that have girl in the title, and someone's got a missing wife, or someone is a killer,
Right.
or like surprise she's evil, or surprise she's killed, or and it's just like, it's like they're collecting piecemeal the things that they find recognizable about Gone Girl without recognizing that what really made Gone Girl so incredible is, first of all, the pacing is just fantastic. Like, it is truly, it feels like dominoes falling. Every single scene leads to every other scene in a way that is just astonishing. Like, that is the number of times I've read that book going, how did she do that? How did she do that? I cannot overstate. But also, it's the really rich and tangled and horrible relationship between these two people who suck, but are so, she gets inside of their head so much that I wouldn't say you root for them, but
But they're
every time they're
compelling.
about to fail, you're afraid for them. Like, you feel in that, like, oh no. And it is a thing of like, this person is doing things that are terrible and they're about to get caught. And
Yeah.
like, I, Sophia, want them to get caught. But I, the reader, I'm like, no,
Right?
no, oh gosh, run away. And
Yeah.
it's,
You're with them.
and
Yeah.
and you can have that with tropes. Like, there's actually a lot of tropes going on in Gone Girl. For one thing, she's like very much excoriating the like lonely professor writer who has an affair with one of his young
Right.
students. Like, that's in there.
Right.
But it's that depth of emotion that made it successful. It's not actually any of these specific plot beats. So if you just try to take the framework without having that emotional depth to it, then people are gonna, and it's like, you're hoping people will see this cover and read it because they liked Gone Girl, and it's like, sure, but they're not gonna like this book.
Well, and then often, I mean, that happens, right, with a lot of, I mean, I'm also reminded of like a lot of well, it's interesting because, so a lot of the first thing I thought of when you said that is Hunger Games, and how a lot
Yeah.
of there's a
I was
spate
also
of
thinking
things
of
that
Hunger
were
Games,
like
yeah.
Hunger Games and captured a certain, and all were in the same category of like, this is a society which is based on some kind of rules that is dystopian, and then these, that's a metaphor for, like, it just turned out to be a really powerful metaphor for adolescence, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, all of a sudden you had all these people, like kids rising up against their society, go figure, that. But and some of them really did seem like they didn't understand what was specifically powerful about Hunger Games,
Yeah.
But also, the other thing that happens when something like that happens is that now there's a it's kind of like I was saying about like comic books, and it's like, oh, there's a hero and there's a villain. The villain has a plan. It's like some of that is just like, now there's a structure that is available where people are like, oh, it's one of those. And then sometimes people do their own thing, which is not what the original thing did, but is also interesting. And they're just kind of like borrowing the boat that they can put the guy, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it's a, I don't know why it's a boat. Why is it a boat? Anyway,
Why not?
what is my boat
Why
analogy?
not a
Anyway,
boat?
they're just I'm just making a boat shape with my hands. They're just borrowing this form that they can, that has become comprehensible, and people know, so in some ways it's like they're riding the coattails of this thing, but also then they might do, and sometimes I think centuries later, it's not really the original one that was a big hit that necessarily sticks around. Sometimes it's one of the ones that was cashing in. I don't know enough about, or no particular example is coming to mind, but I feel like probably there's a lot of that, right? Where it's like the one with legs was not necessarily the one that was the urtext. A great resource for this is TV tropes, because they will talk about like the
Yeah.
original trope namer, and then like the famous, you know what I mean, like how the tropes are. They have this rich vocabulary for how the tropes are averted and subverted and made reference to, and that is really interesting um, about tropes. That's what I was going to say before, was that there's the literal formula, and then there's like tropes, as you were saying, which is kind of like, in a way, everything is composed of these things we've internalized and imprinted on.
Yeah.
And there's always
I
some
think
kind
tropes are
of,
basically inescapable in fiction. Like you can, because of the way the human mind works, that we operate. First of all, we operate so much by heuristic, but also most people, not all people, but most people who are buying books in 2024 are on the internet, which is just like the great disseminator of trope and meme and like creating these shared vocabularies
well,
for
I got to
things.
tell you, here's a funny thing about being the age that I am.
Yes.
People often mourn the fact that there was this shared culture, water cooler. Did you see the Saturday Night Live? Right,
Yeah.
in an era when a hit show would have like
Yeah, it's
a
broken off much
third
more into
of the
smaller
population, and now
factions.
it's zillions of little niches. But what's
Yeah.
interesting is that I remember reading about medieval cultures, or like Talmud, or like the kind of Homeric and biblical allusions that a gentleman of the 17th century would be versed in, and how there would be these kind of elusive conversation, which you see a lot in you know in medieval Jewish and Muslim context, where they're just sort of saying one bit. They just say the beginning of a verse from the Bible or the Quran, and everybody knows, and then somebody else says something that's, they're just having this conversation. Like when you look at an edition of the Talmud, there's like the parts in bold, which are the parts that are actually the Talmud, and then that's like 10% of the, or like 25% of the text, and there's all the stuff that's
Yeah.
filled in, because they're just
Everything
saying
else that you know.
allusions. They're just quoting a few words of something, and then the editor of the edition of the Talmud for modern readers will fill in the rest of the biblical verse and then the implication of that to the current conversation before they
Yeah,
pick
an
up again with the
Islamic
bolded
text is much like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right? It's all this sort of elusive tradition. And I remember being in the 90s and being like, how fascinating. Like, that's not how people talk now. They don't talk with all these illusions.
Yes, it
That's this
is.
no, it wasn't then. It's happened since
It
then.
it wasn't real. So people
There was
really?
there was a huge inflection in the degree to which people started talking in memes. We now once again live in a culture that is like that sort of Talmudic culture, where people will say things that are like memes. They are like these specific elusive texts, or they're like snow clones, the sort of like, oh, I was just talking to Noah yesterday about like, I heard you like X, so I put an X in your X so you can X while you X. And I was talking about the evolution of that snow clone. He was like, what is that from? And I was like, well, the first I remember that it was the form, I heard you like X, so I put an X in your X so you can X while you X, was Facebook, because Facebook introduced this like thing on the right-hand side. Like they cluttered up the interface with this thing on the right side, so that people said like, I heard you like Facebook, so I put a Facebook in your Facebook so you could Facebook while you Facebook.
Oh, is
But I was
that
like,
what that's from? I didn't even know.
But it predates that, because that was the first one with all X's, because I think the original form was Yo Dog. I heard you like X, so I put an X in your Y so you can X while you Y. And I think that is from MTV's Pimp My Ride.
Huh.
Which was something like a Yo Dog, I heard you like hot tub, so I put a hot tub in your car so you can hot tub while you drive or something. Do you know what I mean? Like it took several stages to get to its modern form. But
The
anyway,
iterative nature of
but so much of our conversation,
memes.
because the internet has made this like ur-text that everybody can be like, all your base are belong to us or whatever, like that we could pepper our conversation. I did not talk like that in 1990.
So you didn't have didn't you have other memes and slang?
I mean, there was certainly slang, but it didn't have that form necessarily. The closest thing to it
Wasn't
was
that
things
same
like,
sense of being a reference to something?
the thing that I recall was specifically Saturday Night Live. That there were these like Mike Myers bits on Saturday Night Live, like Schwing, whatever. There was like but it was like the paucity of like which kinds of text there were. People were not going around quoting, the Bible or even the Lord of the Rings. Like people didn't have that to hand. You know what I mean? People literally, as much as everyone was a fan of the Lord of the Rings in 1990, and it was a huge thing, and nobody said you do not simply blank into Mordor. You do not simply walk into.
Because
Nobody
that
said that. Because you'd have to go open a physical book and get to
videos that you were
page.
all, and there wasn't the taking the hobbits to Isengard. Oh, wow.
There wasn't this whole reinforcing cycle of the thing being used again and again in different contexts that created. We've returned to this culture of illusion that used to be in like that. That is like scholars sitting around quoting the midrash or the hadith.
I love the idea that tropes have recreated like Talmudic referential tradition. I just love that for us.
Yes, I watched it happen. I still feel guilty that I pulled it. While we're on this topic, I still feel guilty that earlier in this conversation I pulled the when I was your age.
I mean, I am now very much feeling like, wow, the world has changed so.
I feel bad about it.
Then I say to you, with all the love in my soul, on the scale of microaggressions that I experience on a daily basis, being told that I am a youth, I'm okay with that.
All right, fair enough.
Also, I'm 33. Like, I'm not young enough to be offended by people implying that I'm young.
Fair enough.
If I were a teenager, I would be furious.
Well, yes, no doubt. Anyway, okay, well, we've been at this for a while, and the room I'm in is really cold.
That's because you're in Switzerland in December.
I am in Switzerland in December, and I went to the balcony because I have a very small apartment full of people, and I didn't want to disturb them. But I am kind of cold. So our producer is texting us that we've been at it for 2 hours, and I feel like we should head towards wrapping up. I think we're victorious.
Yeah, we spoke words about stuff.
Hopefully this was entertaining. I had a good time. I don't know.
I had a delightful time. I'm worried that I came across as sounding like I don't like tropes, which I do, but I also said 4 times that I like tropes. So if people take away that I don't like tropes, that's on them.
No, I think people just think you're a Shakespeare sonnet hater.
You know what? I'll take that. I will take that.
Fair enough.
I think Shakespeare sonnets were beautiful, and I think they were deliberately not sincere. Fight me, Shakespeare nerds.
Excellent. All right. Well, I intentionally invited you to co-host the podcast when you don't, as far as I know, particularly have anything to promote, so that when you actually come back when Marianne is here and we interview you, it will be when you do have something out to promote. But if there is anything you want to point people at or let them know about in the meantime, this would be the moment.
Yeah, I have things published, but they're not under my name. No, I don't currently have anything out under my name that you should read, but I am on all of the social medias as either my name or a swinging storm, and I have lots of opinions about stuff. I also run creativity and embodiment workshops, which sounds weird, but it's basically play and dance and improv and all of those things, and then at the end we write a bit. And I've had people say that it broke multi-year writer's blocks. I've had people, especially like a lot of my clients have ADHD, who say that it like really helps with their concentration. It's great for burnout, it's great for anxiety. I don't actually have another one this year because in this when is this gonna come out? Right now it's December 12th. Great.
I'm guessing it'll come out in the first half of 2025.
Okay, great. So I can't actually say when the date is of the thing,
can people
but if you
like sign up for a newsletter
you can
or
totally sign up for my newsletter,
follow
and
you or
I
something? How will
will
they know? How will
give
they know
linky
when the
things.
embodiment and creativity is happening?
Um,
Where should they go?
My recommendation is to follow me on either Blue Sky or Instagram, because I do have a newsletter, but I don't actually say things on it very often. I'm theoretically going to change that, but for now, yeah, Blue Sky and Instagram are the best places to find me, and probably there will be information on that. But on Instagram, it is Sophia, Sophia Babai, Babai, and on Blue Sky, it is swinging storm, as in like you're on a swing in a storm, which is a thing that I used to do a lot
Or
in my
like
youth, and
your
I've never been electrocuted.
or like you're a electrical power X-Man who's,
Or like I'm an electrical
who's
power
like who's
X-Man who's
like
doing a swing dance.
I was going to be like, I don't know, is at a key party anyway. Or perhaps
Or
at
married
doing the
and
Charleston.
having
Yeah.
the fun things. I don't know, man.
Yeah. So, cool. Wait, I was going to say something else about that. All right, that's good. They should look you up. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
I may press you into service at some other time. We'll see.
I love to. Oh, yeah, that's the other thing that people can know, is that I am a speaker and I love to speak on things. So if you have uh any online thing, I mean, it could be in person, but you would have to pay me. If it's online, you don't necessarily have to. But if you like have podcasts that you want to
You
guest speaker
probably
on,
should.
or panels, I love to get paid for things. It's true. But I love to talk about nerdy stuff. I love to talk about psychology. I also don't necessarily love to talk, but I'm very good at talking about human rights and the violations thereof, particularly in the Middle East or Swana region or such like. So if you need someone to show up and talk for hours or shorter periods of time, I'm so good at that. Can't you tell?
As demonstrated.
Indeed.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, listeners. This has been Mohan Raj and Rosenbaum and Babai are humans.
Nope, I'm a tree.
You broke the medium. You destroyed the trope.
Hey humans, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more so you don't miss future episodes of Mohan Raj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Leaving us a good rating also helps us reach a wider audience. If you want to reach us directly to ask questions or continue the conversation, you can email us at mrah@speclit.org. This podcast is hosted by Marianne Mohanraj and Benjamin Rosenbaum. Editing and show notes by Connor Nevitt. Music composed by Thor Bremer, and cover art by Stephanie Bailey. Thanks for tuning in to Mohan Raj and Rosenbaum Are Humans.